is true and accurate?
Yes.
You may be seated. Mr. Marcus, you may begin.
Would you state your name, full name for the record?
William S. Bathgate?
And are you the same William Bathgate who provided testimony in this docket?
Yes.
And is that testimony that you provided true and correct as we sit here today?
Yes.
Okay. I am, Your Honor, going to go through the exhibits 215, 216, especially with Mr. Bathgate, as indicated before. Mr. Bathgate, would you go through to exhibit IPL hearing exhibit 215, if that could be called up?
Yes.
And this is the first page, is a census document appointing, if you could read that first paragraph.
I hereby appoint Sam Weisner of Advanced Compliance Solutions Incorporated to act as our agent in the preparation of an application for equipment authorization of the IDTB 004 to the FCC rules and regulations.
Are you familiar generally with applications for equipment authorizations to the FCC?
Yes, I've personally done 4 and participated in this other 7.
Okay. And what's the process generally, if you could just briefly describe it?
Well, first of all, there's the preparatory documents you must submit that you intend to ask for a letter of authorization, and then you determine an agent to represent you in that proceeding, and then you file the application.
And that is an application to the FCC?
Right.
And what does the FCC do with that application?
Well, they'll review all your information you provided and the test lab provides, and then upon review and approval, then they'll issue a grant.
Is a grant of what?
Grant of authorization to utilize the equipment under the conditions identified in the grant.
Okay. So the FCC may have conditions in connection with their issuance of a grant?
They always do.
Okay. And is it possible they could even deny the application?
Yes.
Okay. So they can approve it, they can deny it, they can impose conditions.
Yeah, they'll either approve or deny. They don't send it back to you for adjustment. They approve or deny.
And the approval could impose conditions.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let me just go before I go to a website. If we could to 214.
14?
214. IPL hearing exhibit 214. And
okay.
Just waiting till we got it on the screen, maybe. So this is IPL's hearing exhibit 214. It's a response to data request number 3. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and if we could scroll down a little to the response, the supplemental response, which we got at the hearing last time, identifies a website, fccid.io.
Correct.
Okay. Have you been to that website at times?
Yes, I have. Several times.
And it says that certain information regarding the smart meters can be found at that website, and then utilizing the following FCC module IDs. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to go to the website first. You see the census stratus meter, and it has a FCC ID number, SDB IDT B004. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know, is that the meter?
No.
That is in front of us?
No, it's not the meter. It's a module.
Okay, so what we're talking about is a module that goes in that meter.
Yeah, it's a subcomponent.
Okay. Is this if we go back to 215 just for a minute. So is it the case that you're familiar with these 215 documents, John? That is an application for approval of a module.
Correct, not the meter,
Not the
module.
whole meter.
Just
That
the module.
module can go in various different meters.
Correct.
Okay. And does the module have a little antenna or transmitter?
Yes, it does.
As
It has
part
an
of it.
antenna, yeah.
Okay. So let's, if we could, go to this website that's in 214, that FCC ID .I0.
Just a
And-
request for clarification on this, Your Honor, or to counsel. So we're going to go to a website.
Right.
Is the material from the website going to be produced as a subsequent exhibit in the case?
Well, some of it's, yes. I mean, basically the key material, yes, that I'm going to identify in the website has either already been produced or will be produced.
Can you identify it in the record, please?
Yes, it's 215, Exhibit 215.
Right, but have you, keep going.
And then my Exhibit 52.
Mr. Marcus, is that the information that is contained on that website or in that website?
215 is, yes, Your Honor. And I'm going to show where that is. Just,
And so if it is in your, and I apologize, this is not my. If this information is contained in the record currently, for what purpose does it serve to go to the website right now?
yeah,
Can we not just go straight to these exhibits?
we could. I just thought it might be more useful to go to the website and see what that was about, since IPL had referred it to us to that website. But if we want to save a little time, we could go directly to the exhibits. I'm fine with that too.
I would prefer it. I don't
Okay.
know about the other two board members, but anything we can do to,
Yeah.
save time is good.
I'm good with that, if that's okay.
You can proceed if you find at some point that you need to go to the website and you can identify for us where that's different than the exhibits that you have filed, then we'll take it up at that time.
In 215, just to see what that is about, and what you would find on the website. I can ask you about that, Mr. Bathgate. But if you would go to page 5 of 67 of 215. And do you see in the diagram of there's a meter and there's a module? Am I correct that the module is that middle item?
No, identified as FlexNet Smart Point Module, I think it's called.
Yeah, okay, good. So that's it.
Yep.
And that is what the FCC is approving or not approving, but that is what the application in 215 is all about, that module.
Correct.
Okay. And if you could go to, now let's go to the Exhibit 52, and that will, this shows, actually, well, let me ask you, does this show what is on that website? The FCC ID, okay.
Yes, it does.
Okay, and at the top, it talks about that same ID, that was identified for us in 214, Exhibit 214, as the smart meter module, the Census smart meter module.
Yes.
Okay. And just in terms of if you go to page not sure I see mine. Okay. If you go to the fourth page, at the bottom, you'll see 4 of 7 on,
Mr. Bathgate, just so you know, the other binder has the exhibit correct. That's
Thank you.
You're welcome.
okay. So if you go to 4 of 17, I just want to show you, maybe we can make that a little clearer. But these are various documents, and are these documents that are submitted to the FCC? Is this part of the application process?
It's part of the process.
Okay, and you'll see that there is, for example, can't see if I have the right one, something called label information.
Yes, I see it.
Okay. And there was an RF exposure document, right above the label, RF exposure. Okay. So let's now go to the next to last page of Exhibit 52. And you'll see it says at the very bottom, grants.
Correct.
And then would you read this?
It says, grant of equipment authorization certification issued under the authority of the FCC.
Okay. And is this what the FCC's decision is in terms of this module and how it can be used?
That's the rendering.
Okay. The rendering means what?
Means their judgment of the document of the application.
Okay, and there's an application examiner, and
Yeah.
he looks at the various documents. Okay. Let's go now to the next page. And you'll see at the top, maybe make it a little clearer. Right there, it says equipment authorization. And would you read that?
Equipment authorization is hereby issued to the name grantee and is valid only for the equipment identified herein for use under the Commission rules and regulations listed below.
Okay, and could we go to the paragraph below, and is that part of the approval of this module? Is that in any way qualify or condition this module?
That is the approval and the constraints around the approval.
Okay, could you read then that paragraph?
Sure. Modular approval. Power listed is conducted. This modular approval is limited to installation for mobile and fixed applications only. This grant is valid only when the device is installed by the grantee or contractors employed by the grantee who are instructed to ensure that the end user has no manual instructions to remove or install the device. The transmitter must be installed to provide a separation distance of at least 20 centimeters from all persons and must not be co-located or operated in conjunction with any other antenna or transmitter. Installers and end users must be provided with transmitter operation conditions for satisfying RF exposure compliance.
Okay, and when it says that the meter, the transmitter, that is the little antenna in the module, I think you testified?
Right.
And that must be installed, it says, to provide separation distance of at least 20 centimeters from all persons. Now, does that mean all persons inside the house, or does that include all persons who may come in front of the meter outside the house as well?
All persons from inside and outside.
You recall that Mr. Reed testified that this meter complies with all FCC conditions. But you also heard him say that the meter transmitter is 1 inch from the end of the meter cap.
Correct.
On that bigger
Yes.
die. in your opinion, has this been installed so that it maintains a separation distance of 20 centimeters from all persons?
No.
Okay. Is it possible that maybe when Mr. Reed was talking that he means that the device is approved, the module is approved, but in terms of its use, the user must be sure that it's installed 20 centimeters away?
Yes, and warned as such.
Okay. Yeah, just so we're clear on the record, and 20 centimeters in inches is,
About 7.8 inches.
okay,
That's approximate. Within
I want to go back to 215, if we could. Now you'll see, and maybe you recall, Mr. Reed reading the labels that are on that FCC device.
yes.
If you go to page 10 of Exhibit 215,
I'm on page 10, but I don't see the label.
at the top, you'll see page 10 of 67.
Oh, sorry, I apologize. Yeah, now I'm on the right page.
Okay, certification, label information.
Yes.
Could you read that label information, I'm sorry, that's on page 11?
It's on page 11, yes. It says, of course, it gives the title at the top, and then it says, this device complies with Part 15 of the FCC rules. Operation is subject to the following two conditions. This device may not cause harmful interference, and two, the device must accept interference received, including interference that may cause undesired operation.
Okay. Does this FCC sticker have anything to do with modifying the 20 centimeter rule as to where, how
Has
that?
nothing to do with it. It's completely unrelated.
Okay. And could you explain that?
Because this is not part of the grant. This wording is not part of the grant.
So it's not part of the grant, but the FCC considered this label. That was part of the information.
This is an FCC Part 15 label requirement.
Okay. So it doesn't, is it your case that this relates to interference,
Correct. Only to interference.
transmissions, other transmissions, things of that, and not interfering with other transmissions? It doesn't relate to a safety requirement that people stay 20 centimeters away, is that correct?
No, it has nothing to do with it.
Okay. And is that the case if you go to the next label, at the top? You don't have to read it. This is page 12. Is your description of what that label applies to? It's pretty much the same
It's
label.
pretty much the same level as prior.
So, from your perspective, the FCC is aware that these labels are going to be put on the device. Isn't that the case?
That's correct.
But they're still imposing a 20 centimeter rule.
That's correct. It's part of the grant.
Okay. And let's go to the certification exhibit, if we could, which is page 13.
Okay.
You remember that Mr. Reed and Mr. Callisto went through that. You see on page 14, if we could. I'm sorry, it's exhibit 215 still. Okay. You'll see at page 14 that there is a table. The table refers to 20 centimeters. It doesn't say much more about it. And then below that, there is a sentence under side heading RF exposure. Could you read that?
In accordance with the FCC requirements of human exposure to radio frequency fields, the radiated element shall be installed in such a minimum separation distance of 20 centimeters and will be maintained.
Okay. And the conclusion that this is an ACS document. Is
Not
that
an FCC conclusion.
okay? This is the ACS, part of the ACS application, correct?
Yeah, and this is part of the application. It's very rare to have a laboratory give you a conclusion.
I see.
Very rare.
Okay.
Because I've done these, and
Okay, but ACS is volunteering then a conclusion. And would you read that?
the device complies with the maximum permissible exposure, MPE, requirements by providing adequate separation between the device, any radiating structure, and the general population.
Okay. Is that the conclusion of the FCC?
No,
The FCC grant is the conclusion
exactly.
that it must be installed to maintain that 20 centimeter distance.
PCS cannot guarantee the adequate separation.
Okay.
I don't know how they come to this conclusion at all. It's crazy.
Well, is it possible they don't know about the 1 inch? I mean, the device, the meter is different and the device is different from where that module goes in the meter. Is it possible they don't know about the 1 inch?
I wouldn't suppose any assumption on their part.
Okay, so you just don't know. But you don't, this application precedes the grant of authority, correct?
Correct.
The grant of authority is the final word.
Right.
Okay. I'd like to go now to Exhibit 216.
Okay.
And do you remember generally the testimony of Mr. Reed on Exhibit 216?
Yes, I do.
And am I correct in saying that this is another ACS document, test report?
Correct.
And this is not a document, or maybe it is, tell me, submitted to the FCC?
I can't tell
Okay,
because I don't see a grant.
okay. But this is a document, as you recall, that was submitted to rebut your testimony about the dirty electricity or conducted emissions
Right. Mhm.
on the census stratus meter that you opined on in your rebuttal testimony, correct?
In my testimony, I gave testimony to the Itron C1S meter and the census meter that I was able to examine at the IPL facilities, but I wasn't able to do an isolated test on it. I did just kind of a general test.
Okay. And this test report that's 216 relates only to the dirty electricity that you measured on the census stratus meter, not dirty electricity on the Itron 215.
Right. Or the Landis and Gear meter, which is referred to here.
Okay. Let's go to the first page of Exhibit 216, if we could.
Go back. Let's read further down.
And would you read the sentence that begins this report?
Yeah. This report must not be used by the client to claim product certification, approval, or endorsement by ANAB, NIST, or any agency of the federal government.
Okay. And you've reviewed this report now. You've had an opportunity
I have.
to. Okay. Did you find any problems or irregularities in this report?
I did find some irregularities.
Okay. First, go to page 8 of the document. You'll see the page is only at the bottom. And you see, it says EUT and support equipment description. What does EUT mean?
And unit test.
Okay. Or equipment under test?
Equipment under test, yeah.
And so there's two, oh, the equipment under test is the census, and the meter pan is Landis.
Yeah, there's no test results for Landising here in this report at all.
Okay. It's just the census stratus meter.
Correct.
Okay. And would you go to page 11 of 31?
Okay.
And it says test equipment radiated emissions. What's the test equipment that they're using?
The Roden Schwartz is a signal, thank you.
Okay.
That's a spectrum analyzer.
Okay. And this is the particular model number?
Yeah, that's a particular model number.
Okay.
And then the others are, cables and antennas and some software. The only real test equipment here is the spectrum analyzer referenced.
Okay.
I noticed the LISN is not listed either.
Okay. So, first off, is there any issue with using the Rade and Schwartz spectrum analyzer for this test?
There is some discrepancies which I was concerned about.
Yeah. What are they?
Anytime you turn, I own two spectrum analyzers myself personally, okay? And when you turn them on, they will default to a particular level of attenuation, in other words, dampening of the signal. And some are 20 dB, some are 10 dB. It depends on the model. But if you don't zero it out to 0 dB, every reading you have from that point forward is an indication of an incorrect reading.
Okay.
There is no documentation in this report of what the attenuation is on the spectrum analyzer. Not a word about it.
So if they don't talk about setting the meter, taking into account the test meter, taking into account the attenuation, then you can't. Is it the case that you can't tell whether the measurements they report are accurate or not?
That's correct. You'd have to disqualify the entire report in all the readings.
Okay. So it's just not in there. They may have done it. Is that the case? But
They didn't provide the report. I mean, this is a very professional organization. I've used ACS before. I'm stunned that the setup information is not included in this report.
okay.
Every report I ever had done had all the information in there.
Okay. Is there a second issue with respect to the test equipment that was used, the spectrum analyzer?
Basically the setup is a problem, and you don't know how they connected it. The measurement is done for the conducted emissions and the radiated emissions. Radiated emissions are measured at a distance of 3 meters, which is 9 feet 9 inches. Okay, and their particular readings they get at 9 feet 9 inches is very far away from what would be considered the human exposure.
I see.
So the wire in the wall is 2 or 3 feet from your lounge chair or your couch, and the measurement's 9 feet 9 inches away. This is like measuring a blowtorch from 10 feet away, saying I don't feel any heat, and then sitting next to the blowtorch 2 feet away and getting burned.
I see. And is that a problem, the fact that it's measured 9 feet away, a problem in the measurement of the radio frequency or the conducted emissions, or both?
It is the conducted emissions and the radiated emissions of the conducted emissions test. It's kind of confusing.
So, I see. So it's a problem when they were doing it 9 feet away with all the measurements,
Well, for the radiated emission measurements, yes.
the radio emissions, and including the conducted emissions.
Well, that's part of the conducted test.
Okay.
It's a little confusing in the way the FCC words this.
Okay. Let's go now to, if we could, page 23, and tell me what that data is that you start to see in the tables.
Okay.
Maybe go. Why don't we start with going to tested modes? And you see, if you'd read under tested modes in the first table without well, the first table on the page, the EUT, read that.
The EUT was tested in its normal mode of operation as used in residential installations.
Is that accurate statement?
No, because temperatures in the meter is outside the house, and it can be, as you know, in Iowa, anywhere from 20 or 30 below up to 120 degrees. I don't know how they could make a evaluation based on the range of temperatures experienced here in Iowa and say everything's good at 25 degrees C.
Okay. Then, with respect to the reference in the tables to line 1 AC mains and neutral AC mains, is there any issue with that?
Yes, and I've done these reports before. You would normally consider line 1 and line 2. Neutral means nothing. There is no neutral connection on the back of this meter. It doesn't exist.
It's the other meters the census
Doesn't
shows.
matter. They're both back. The same. Look the same on the back.
Okay,
There's no neutral connection in any meter.
okay.
But yeah, we're doing a test on neutral line. What do we test a neutral line for?
Well,
Makes no sense.
okay. Do you know how they can get numbers if there's no connection for a neutral line?
I believe the LISN device has a neutral connection, but there's no point in conducting a test on neutral. What is totally meaningless?
I see. Okay, and if you conduct a test then on line 1 and not line 2, which you say are the two ways the test should be done, what's the problem?
You don't know where the switching circuitry for the power supply is on. You don't know if it's connected to line 1 or line 2. There's nothing in this document that identifies what this circuit is feeding.
Okay.
So we're missing half the data.
Okay. So, and tell me, when you say you don't know whether line 1 or line 2 is connected to the switching power supply, is it the switching power supply in the device that creates dirty electricity?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And just explain how it is that the switching power supply creates dirty electricity.
Well, it basically is a switching circuit, and it can be done several different ways. But basically what it's doing is taking AC high voltage and converting it to low voltage. And it does that by switching very fast. It's very similar to like if you were to go into your home and go to your light switch and flip it on as humanly fast as possible, you'll notice that the light bulb dims. Okay? And that reduces voltage. So it's a very similar concept. It's a little simpleton type explanation, but I think you get the idea.
Okay. So if you only test line 1 and not line 2, and then you don't know if they had line 1 connected to the switching power supply in the meter. Is that correct?
That's right. You don't know.
Okay.
This report doesn't explain that at all.
Okay. So potentially the report is problematic and concealing, if you will.
Well, I'm not going to say concealing, but it is improper to do a test with only line 1.
Okay. Let's go to the actual numbers.
Okay.
Let's look at line 1, for example,
All right.
and you'll see the left column is the frequency in megahertz. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what is that all about?
That's the frequency that the spectrum analyzer would be looking at to measure the actual RF emissions in UBM.
Okay.
So it's basically a conversion from a radio. It's kind of a radio signal, if you want to call it that, into a voltage characteristic. And the actual, if you go further down in the other examples, you'll see the actual end result that they published, including the correction factors.
Okay. And then that first, second, and third columns, what are they about?
Well, the quasi-peak is the peak value that they're looking for from a compliance standpoint. An average is just another reading, the kind of RMS, like all voltages are broken down into RMS voltages. And then the limit is the actual, what the specification limit is.
And whose limit is that?
That's the FCC limit.
Okay. So if the quasi-peak and the average are less than the FCC limit, it indicates for that frequency no problem. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
It's within the limits. Okay. And you see in all of these, you can see it's within the limits, correct, on this page?
Yes, and notice how the frequency selected skip around, from, I'm amazed that the report goes from 2.6 megahertz to almost 14 megahertz, like in one step.
That's what you're seeing here, 2.6 megahertz, okay. And then go to the next one. Should we look at the neutral or bypass it?
No, I wouldn't bother. It's useless information.
Go to the next page.
Okay.
But the neutral is also within FCC limits, whatever that means. Okay.
It's meaningless.
Okay. Go to the next page.
Okay.
It's again the quasi-peak and the average within the FCC limits, correct?
Correct.
At those frequencies. Here we have...
Only at that specific frequency. And
okay. We could go through the rest of the pages. There's 5 or 6 pages. But we're going to find that for all the frequencies, are we not, that they're reporting that it goes through, it's within the FCC limits,
for
correct?
the selected frequencies
Okay.
in these tables.
What's the problem with that they're selecting these frequencies?
Well, I do this testing myself. Okay, I have an LISN in my home lab, okay, and I do this pre-compliance testing my own. And you normally look for a graphical representation of compliance across all frequencies. The FCC does not say check 0.699 megahertz. It doesn't say that in any of the specifications. It's for the entire frequency range,
I
not
see.
a specific spot.
Okay. Well, is there any frequency that you found in particular that concerned you that is omitted in the tables?
Yes, from prior information, 300 kilohertz is not in the report. This report.
Is that 0.3 megahertz?
Yes.
Okay. So if you see, go back to the page 23, for example, and you see that here you have 0.2 megahertz, and then it's jumping to 2 megahertz. If we go through all these tables, you're saying we'll never see a table that gives the dirty electricity at 0.3 megahertz.
Yes, it appears the report is selectively choosing certain frequencies,
Okay.
and not all frequencies, certain frequencies.
Okay. And you're saying that, let's go to the last page of the tables. That is page 30 of 31. And you're saying that somewhere, either at the end of the tables or the beginning of the tables, there would be a graph showing the totality of the data points.
Every report I have ever had done on conducted emissions included a graphical representation of all frequency observations.
Okay. Let's go, if we could now, to my exhibit 51. You have that?
Yep.
In the first page. You see, this is a test report, again by ACS, 2006, and it's on the SDB. Do you see at the top?
Yeah, that's the entire unit.
Okay. And do you know that is a census meter or census module? We could go to 2000 Exhibit 214 and see that the B001 is a census icon meter.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a meter, a report on a meter in the census family, census integrated display transceiver. Okay. And if we'll go to the okay, if you go to page 31 of Exhibit 51,
Okay.
is this what we're going to see? Or is this? Oh no, I'm sorry. Go to page 32.
Okay.
And what are these tables on 32 and 33?
Well, these are the conducted emissions tests.
Okay, same kind of tests as were done
Yeah.
on the in Exhibit 216 for the census stratus meter. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
and you'll notice on page 32 and 33, it references line 1 and line 2. No reference to neutral.
Okay, so this you conceive of as being
This would be an appropriate report.
okay. And look at the bottom of the tables there on page 33. Is this the graph that you're talking about that you believe is needed for an
Yeah.
accurate report?
Yeah, I would agree. Without this graph, you have no idea of the table references that were made in 216 as being an accurate reflection of whether it complies to conducted emissions
At all frequencies.
at all frequencies.
Okay. And let's explain, if you would, that graph. The horizontal line that's running through the graph, it starts at about
Yes.
68 at the top, and then goes.
Yeah, the lines are the quasi peak and the average.
Okay, is that those are, you see at the bottom there's a table.
Yeah.
And the table shows that these bottom lines, those are the FCC limits. Is that correct?
The bottom lines.
Lim FCC.
Yeah, those are the
Quasi-peak.
actual
Okay.
references.
Okay.
And the graph shows the limits
Okay.
themselves.
So just so we're clear, this is the FCC
Limit.
peak limit,
Yeah, the peak limit is the top line.
and this is
And
the
then
FCC
the average line, if you want to call
average limit.
Yeah.
So if you see that the representation of the data points goes above the FCC limits in this area right here,
Right.
and in this area here, what does that tell you?
That it's not compliant to FCC conducted emissions.
Okay, and is that at that 300 kilohertz level?
Yeah, you can see it's approximately from 280 to 300
Okay,
kilohertz.
and is that the frequency range that was omitted in the census stratus report that's 216?
Yeah, completely missing.
Okay. Does this suggest to you in any way the fact that they exceed the limits at that roughly 0.3 megahertz, that there may be a problem in the census meters at that frequency level?
This graph shows there's a problem.
Okay. Just go to the end of this report. Do you think that if this was submitted to the FCC, it would not be approved, or do you
Would not be approved.
Okay. You see, at the end of the report, they show graphs. There is no conclusion in this
No.
report. Did you look at the table of contents at the beginning and see if there's a conclusion?
Let me look. No.
Okay. Does that confirm your belief that if you go above the FCC limits at any particular frequency, that you can't conclude that this device is in compliance?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to add about this particular, either 216 or this document?
Well, I've submitted a lot of these reports, to be created, and I would do pre-compliance testing in advance. Okay, and I use that pre-compliance testing to correct any engineering flaws before I submit it for formal test by ACS, because it's a very expensive test. Okay.
ACS's test.
Yes, it's very expensive. But I would do pre-compliance testing to verify that I was in compliance before I send it to them to spend the money. Okay. And you tell ACS kind of what you're looking for them. If you have an area of concern, you tell them, make sure you check this frequency and that frequency, and tell them that kind of information. And I don't know what happened in 216, why the graphs are missing.
Exhibit 216.
Exhibit 216. Why the graphs are missing. That's very unusual for them not to be included, as you can see by this exhibit.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Mr. Callisto.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Bathgate, why don't we stay where we are? Let's talk about Exhibit 51. Where did this exhibit come from?
From ACS.
I mean, it was on the FCC website, is that right?
I am not certain of that.
Where did you get it from?
We got it from research we did. I didn't research this particular one, but research the team did.
I'm going to take you to the top of page 1 of Exhibit 51.
Page 1.
Page 1. And what is that at the top that the pen is pointing to?
Lippman Matera hearing Exhibit 5.
I'm sorry, on the screen.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't have that on my page. Oh, the FCC IDIO. Yeah,
So doesn't that look like that's a website login for this document?
I think so. Yeah,
Right, so it's safe to say this came from the FCC website.
probably.
So it was filed with the FCC.
I presume so.
Okay. And you're saying that despite the fact it was filed with the FCC, it shows that the meter itself, I want to go to page 33, please.
Okay.
That this particular meter, according to the graph as you've described it, is in violation of FCC requirements in the 300 kilohertz or 0.3 megawatt area.
0.3 megahertz. Yep.
0.3 megahertz, correct?
Correct.
That's your testimony.
Yes.
Do you know if this meter got certified by the FCC?
I don't know that.
And do you know if this particular meter from 2006 is even in service any longer?
I don't know. It probably is in service.
But this is not the meter that we're speaking about that's being installed by Align in this case.
I don't know because we don't know what the circuit design is. That's part of this design that's in the meter we're talking about, your current IPL meter. I don't know.
But you can't testify to whether or not this reflects the meter that's being installed by IPL.
And I don't know if IPL can tell that either.
You, sir.
I don't know the answer to your question.
And you don't know as you sit here whether or not this testing report led to FCC certification for this device, do you?
I didn't go into that element of this discovery.
Again, on page 33 of the same Exhibit 51, that chart is just a reflection, that graph is just a reflection of the data points on the chart above it, correct?
This is the output of the measurement device, which is the spectrum analyzer. So this is the full frequency range the spectrum analyzer saw.
And how is that different than the charts above?
Because in the charts above, there was only certain frequencies they selected.
And why do they select certain frequencies?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Why does the FCC ask them to select certain frequencies?
The FCC doesn't specify which frequencies to select.
Do you believe this report was in violation of any FCC standards when it was made?
I believe it is.
And did you report that to the FCC?
Why would I do that?
Has
It's not
anybody
my role.
Has anybody reported that to the FCC?
I don't know. Most of these reports are buried in websites that nobody looks at.
As you sit here today, can you testify under oath that any of the Stratus or Census products have not been certified by the FCC?
For conducted emissions,
Yes.
I don't know which ones have and which ones haven't. I haven't got a list.
So the question to you, sir, was as you sit here today under oath, can you testify that any Stratus or Census products have not been certified by the FCC when certification has been requested?
I don't know the answer to your question. You're asking me a question about an FCC ruling which I don't have access to.
That's all public, isn't it?
I didn't look it up.
Is it public?
I don't know. You'll have to go look. They'll have to ask Census for their actual report of compliance. I'm not the person that tells you they're in compliance.
You began your testimony today by saying that you're highly qualified to understand FCC testing, isn't that right? My question to you is, are the FCC tests public when they are filed at the FCC?
They are public.
My second question to you then as a follow-up is, have you checked personally to see whether any Stratus or Census products have failed FCC certification?
I have not personally checked that, no.
You can go to Exhibit 216, please. And if I understand the road that you just took on your prior testimony, you believe that the evidence from Exhibit 51 supports some nefarious purpose for not putting in Exhibit 216 the 0.3 megahertz data. Is that correct?
I did not say those words.
What is your conclusion then on that?
I said I don't know the reasons why it was excluded.
But you specifically pointed to 0.3 megahertz in
Yes, I
Exhibit
did.
216.
But I didn't say
Let me
it was
finish the
something-
question,
Don't
please.
put words in my mouth, sir.
I'm the lawyer. I get to ask the question, sir. That's how this works. In Exhibit 216, you specifically pointed out 0.3 megahertz as a missing data point.
Yes, it is.
And why did you do that?
Because as I reviewed this prior report, I noticed there was a discrepancy in the fact that the data points did not match any graph that should have been represented in Report 216. There should have been a graph in there.
And I understand you've made 2 points here. The one is the graph is missing, and the second is that there's no data in your testimony in the 0.3 megahertz range. Is that right?
Correct.
I'm going to direct your attention to page 25 of Exhibit 216, please. The chart at the top of page 25, does it not have two representative frequency tests at 0.35 megahertz?
Top of 25, 3.5 megahertz is not there. It goes from 2.7 to 14.
I think you're looking at different, look on the screen, please. You're looking at the wrong page, I believe.
I'm on page 25 of 31.
Well, so am I, and so is the screen, and we're seeing something
Okay, all
different.
right, so go back to the top. So it's 0.359, 0.359.
Correct. So your testimony, there was nothing in the 0.3 range, is that
Right.
right?
Nothing at 0.3, exactly.
Nothing exactly at 0.3, but we have 0.35 in two spots there, correct?
Correct.
And if you could turn to page 29 of that same document, 28 of that same document.
Okay.
And that top chart has 0.377
Right.
in two locations.
Yes.
And page 29,
Yep. 2.4, 0.24.
0.24. And if we go to page 30, please. And on the bottom chart, 0.35, 0.35, 0.37, and 0.37. Correct?
What's your point?
That there are data points that as I just described in that range.
Not 0.3?
Not 0.3, but close.
Not close enough.
We can go to Exhibit 52, please.
Okay.
So, my understanding of the question and answers from your counsel that you gave on this was that this exhibit, and specifically at page 7 of 7, has a 20 centimeter requirement for distance from the transmitter. Is that right?
Yep.
And it's your testimony based upon what Mr. Reed said at the prior 2 days of the hearing that this meter is in violation of the FCC certification that was granted here?
What I said was that the 20 centimeter rule, okay, has to be maintained from all persons. And that's all I said.
Okay, so you're not testifying that the device that is being used by Census, or in this case by Itron, are in violation of that 20 centimeter rule?
That's not, it's basically application specific of where the human exposure would be. And I can't control that. And that would be a responsibility of IPL to control that. ACS, in fact, said they can't control that.
Mr. Bathgate, did you do any testing in this case on radio frequency?
Only a very, very brief amount in the lab at the IPL facility just to see what frequency the meters were transmitting at.
And so you were here, or you were at the testing when Ms. Matara was using her device as well?
Yeah.
It's fair to say that her device is not a scientifically credible device.
I wouldn't say that.
Do you use that device?
I use it as a general purpose device to verify is there RF present and what strength relative is it, not the frequency. You need a spectrum analyzer with the proper antenna to get the actual frequency itself.
And have you ever used that device in any sort of legal proceeding or certification you've been involved with?
Only from a general purpose standpoint, not from a certification standpoint.
I'm going to direct your attention to page 5 of your rebuttal testimony, please.
I hate to interrupt. Is it possible for me to take a 30-second break, and I'll be right back?
My experience is the Utilities Board does not take 30-second breaks. If we are going to take a break, can we at least finish up with Mr.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just to continue where we finished, Mr. Bathgate, if you could turn to page 5 of your rebuttal testimony.
What exhibit?
It's your rebuttal testimony.
What exhibit number is it?
It's not an exhibit, it's up on the screen. If you could read the sentence that begins on line 7 with "there is a radio frequency."
There's a radio frequency specification that also applies, but this is a test only done in the lab setting with very special testing setup. Transient voltages are easy to measure in the field with an oscilloscope.
So as to that first sentence concerning radio frequency, it's your sworn testimony that that really should only be done in a lab setting, correct?
For radio frequency, yes.
I want to take us back to the 20 centimeter issue. So I think I'll strike that. These meters are typically set up outside the house, correct?
Correct. Typically.
And typically, and you heard Mr. Reed testify that including the base plate and the house itself, there's more than the 20 centimeter distance between the inside of the house and the
I don't recall him
transmitter.
saying that.
But if that's the case, that is likely the case, correct?
What's that?
That is likely the case that is between the meter, transmitter, and the inside of the house.
I wouldn't know because I don't know exactly how they're installed here in Iowa, but it's not uncommon to see them within 6 inches.
Okay, well, I'd like you to assume for argument's sake that the record from the prior hearing said that there were approximately, I don't want to speculate on what the record said. I'll withdraw that. IPL, when it installs a meter outside the house, can't prevent somebody from walking up and touching the meter, can they?
Certainly they could.
For every meter?
They certainly could.
Put up a fence around the house?
No, you could put a guard around the meter box itself to prevent exposure within 20 centimeters. It's very easy to do. Piece of metal.
And do you see examples of that?
Say what?
You have examples of that to talk about?
I don't have any here, no.
And typically when you see a meter installed on a house, in your experience, it's installed as you see it in the table here today, correct? Into the meter socket, exposed to the elements.
Let me clarify that. What's been going on in industry is people have taken the analog meter off the house and the socket in the house, which did not have a 20 centimeter ruling, and then just slap another meter on that does have the 20 centimeter ruling and make no other provisions to prevent the exposure from the human. They didn't pay attention to the rule.
As you sit here, you have no evidence that IPL is in violation of what you call the 20 centimeter rule, do you?
It'd be very easy. Go paint the side of the house, go paint the meter box. You're within 20 centimeters. Not a problem with a paintbrush.
As you sit here, you have no evidence to support any conclusion that IPL is in violation of the so-called 20 centimeter rule, do you?
You would be.
Your Honor,
You would be if you stand next to the thing. IPL can't prevent that unless they put some type of provision to prevent the exposure from that distance.
I'll ask for a readback of the question, please.
Question, as you sit here, you have no evidence to support any conclusion that IPL is in violation of the so-called 20 centimeter rule, do you?
Say it again. I thought I answered this already.
Question, as you sit here, you have no evidence to support any conclusion that IPL is in violation of the so-called 20 centimeter rule, do you?
Oh, they absolutely can be in violation of the 20 centimeter rule. Very easily. Just walk up next to the meter and take a look at it. You are now within range.
Mr. Bathgate, I believe what he's asking you is, do you have any evidence or factual information that's in the record that would state that IPL is in violation of the 20 centimeter rule?
This was not a question or part of any interrogatory that I was responsible for responding to. Had I been asked that question, I would have said, yes, they would be in violation.
And what evidence do you have that they're in violation?
The physical presence of the meter and its meter socket on the side of the home and its proximity that a person can walk up next to it and be exposed.
What FCC rule supports a conclusion that IPL has to put protective equipment around its meter to protect against the 20 centimeter rule?
It's in the grant. It says it right there in the grant. Oh, what else do you want to know?
In the grant from the
It's in
FCC?
the grant from the FCC, 20 centimeter separation from humans.
Would direct your attention to Exhibit 216, please.
Okay. What page?
Page 8.
Page 8.
You point on page 8 to the Landis, and is it gear or gyre?
I don't know how it's pronounced. I pronounce Landis and Gear, and some people call it Geyer. I'm not sure.
Let's just call it Landis. You point to the Landis designation in line 2 of that table 3.3-1 as an example of an error in this report. Is that right?
I'm not sure it's an error. It's an omission.
So is that because you think it should say census?
This report is only on the census, not on the Landis. And Landis has been installed in Iowa.
So it's possible that they were using the prior template and they didn't take out Landis.
I don't know what they did. I can't judge what their thought process is.
But I just want to make sure I understand your concern. It's the fact that it says Landis and not
There's
census.
Landis. There's no test report for Landis. And IPL is installing Landis gear meters with
And-
no backup documentation about its compliance.
All right, we're talking about this test report right now. I want to understand your concern about this test report. And as I understand it's because that box doesn't say census, it says Landis.
It says census, and then it says Landis, and no data on the Landis at all.
So it's the fact that it has NA?
Yeah.
What's a meter pan?
I'm not certain what they refer by meter pan, but I can't imagine what they're referring to, because I didn't fill out this report.
So you don't even know what a meter pan is.
I'm not certain what they mean by meter pan in this
Okay.
report.
But it gives you concern that this thing you don't know about has the word Landis on it instead of census.
Say again.
This thing you don't know what it is, it's apparently made by Landis, and that gives you concern.
Yeah, I don't know where's the data on the Landis part in this report.
Isn't a meter pan most likely a plate to which the meter attaches?
I don't know. It doesn't explain that in the report.
I'm going to turn your attention to page 11.
Okay.
You testified on questions from your attorney that you had concerns with table 4.1.2-1 because the Rodian Schwartz device doesn't have any evidence in this report of calibration. Is that right?
I didn't say that, calibration.
What's your concern with it?
My concern is that the setup of the parameters on this device are not identified in this report.
So the fact that they're not identified doesn't mean that they weren't done correctly.
We don't know. It's not in the report. You normally include it in the report what your setups are. I always did. In other words, the attenuation on the devices that's measuring values is very, very important for validity of the test results. It's not mentioned in this report anywhere.
And is that the standard, that what you do is the right way to do it?
Yeah. What the attenuation settings are, the settings for the whole setup.
And in the course of doing things right in the past, you yourself have testified that you've used ACS. Is that right?
I've used ACS before, yes, in other labs.
Can you point to anything in this test report that's Exhibit 216 that is in violation of FCC rules?
Well, other than the missing data,
What specific FCC rule is that in violation of?
would be the conducted emissions relative to 0.3 megahertz. It's not in this report.
I'm asking you what specific rule is it in violation of?
Conducted emissions. FCC Class B.
Right. That's the general chapter for the FCC rules. I'm asking you for the specific rule as an expert on this issue that is in violation in this
I
report.
don't have the rule book in front of me. I'd have to go refer to that.
You didn't think that was important in preparing for today's examination when you're going to attack?
I don't
Let me
memorize
finish,
this
please.
information, and nor does anybody else.
You didn't think it was important today in preparation for your testimony to look at the FCC rules before you attack the report of a
No,
testing
I
organization?
looked at the rules. Okay, in the rules, I did review the rules relative to the overall, just like on the graph we talked about before, with those rules. That's the rule set right there. Okay.
And if this report was filed with the FCC if this report was used by the FCC, do you believe they would have found the violation, or if it was seen by the FCC?
I don't know what they would do. I'm not the FCC examiner. It would be, if I was the FCC examiner, I would look at the prior report and compare notes. Why there's a discrepancy between previous filings and this filing.
I'm going to direct your attention to your testimony again, sir, page 4, line 20.
Of which exhibit?
Your testimony, rebuttal testimony.
I don't have it on the screen.
Can you please read the sentence that begins on line 16?
FCC regulations can be found on this website reference. There are other locations or the web that display the same reference information, such as the FCC itself.
And then you give a site to a web link. And what is that web link?
That's a actual course that's taught on conducted emissions at Michigan State University, and I know the professor that teaches that class.
Who's the professor?
Dr. Smith.
And what's Dr. Smith's specialty?
He's an electronics engineering professor. He's a PhD.
Your Honor, I'm going to hand out another exhibit, please. It's been marked as IPL Exhibit 220. Both attorneys have received the exhibit already.
Mr. Callisto, and what is that entire? I don't have numbers on the ones you handed me. What's it entitled?
This is Module 8.
Got it.
You have that? 220. Okay. Give another one. I think we may need one more down here. We may need one more, sorry. To Mr. Marcus, thank you. Thanks. Mr. Bathgate, you have in front of you what's been marked as IPL Exhibit 220?
Yes.
And that, in fact, is the chapter that pulls up from that link that you have on page 4
Yes,
of
it
your
is.
testimony?
This is.
I'd like you to read on page 8-1 of that exhibit, the bottom, next to the last paragraph, begins with the word "with the advent." That sentence, please.
With the advent of computers and other digital devices becoming popular, the FCC realized that it was necessary to impose limits on the electromagnetic emissions of these devices in order to minimize the potential that they would interfere with radio and wire communication. As a result, the FCC set limits on the radiated and conducted emissions of the digital devices. Digital devices are defined by the FCC.
Okay, I'm sorry. You can stop there. I just wanted the first sentence, but thank you. So the FCC's concern as regard to subpart 15, and the reason you're testifying, is about interference with other devices. Is that right?
At a conducted emissions level.
Correct. And I'm not talking about RF. I'm talking about conducted emissions.
Yeah.
And so you're not testifying as a health expert.
As a what?
As a health expert.
Absolutely not.
And the FCC standards that you're testing about are in place to protect the impact of conducted emissions on other devices. Is that right?
Other devices, yes.
Including the 20 centimeter rule?
And that's an RF emissions in Exhibit 215, not 216.
I'm going to direct your attention to page 8-2. Could you please read at the bottom of that paragraph the sentence that begins, personal computers are?
Personal computers are a subcategory. Class B devices are regulated more strictly than other digital devices. Computer manufacturers must test their devices and submit their test results to the FCC. No other digital devices require that test data be sent to the FCC. Rather, the manufacturer is expected to test their own device and ensure they are electromagnetically compatible, and the FCC will police the industry through testing of random product samples.
And so that paragraph from your friend's course materials says that the FCC rules, essentially it's subpart 15, for conducted emissions do not have to be filed with the FCC. Is that right?
It does not require them to be filed with the FCC, except compliance is required by the FCC.
Correct. And the report that is Exhibit 216 from IPL is a subpart 15 report that does not have to be filed with the FCC but must be maintained. Is that right?
It has to demonstrate compliance. I'm gonna clarify, not just not filed, but it also must demonstrate compliance, whether it's filed with the FCC or not.
And according to your friend's course summary, the FCC will do spot checks to see whether manufacturers are in compliance with that subpart, correct?
Yep, and I've actually had a spot check done on one of my reports, and they're very thorough.
And are you aware of any spot checks that have been done on any of the meters that IPL is using where the manufacturer failed the spot check?
I don't know. I'm not an FCC examiner.
I don't want to have to go through this again, but my question is, are you aware of any spot checks done by the FCC on any devices being used by Alliant Energy where the manufacturer failed the spot check?
You need to ask the FCC that question, not me.
Your Honor.
Mr. Callisto, on this one, I think you have 3 different areas he can answer the question. So do you want to restate it?
I'll try and break it down. I'm sorry. Mr. Bathgate, are you aware of any spot checks that the FCC has conducted on census meters?
I have no data to support that.
Is that data publicly available if it was done?
I would not know.
And are you aware of any spot checks that have been done on census meters that are to be used by IPL?
I have no data to support that one way or the other.
Mr. Bathgate, do you have any reason to believe that census has not filed or received any necessary FCC licenses or permits required in this to use its meters?
I'm not sure I understand your question. You're asking me to make a rendering on whether census has done something?
Do you have any evidence that census has not strike that? Do you have any evidence that census has not filed for and received all necessary FCC permits for use of the meters which it is selling to IPL?
I don't know.
Do you have any evidence that Itron has not filed for and received all FCC permits or approvals for the meters that it is selling to IPL?
I don't know that data. Only the manufacturers have that data.
Well, didn't we just spend some time, and didn't your counsel spend some time walking you through what's available on the FCC site?
Yes, but like I said, I'm not the person that can make that testament to whether they complied or not.
Your Honor, I have another exhibit. This has been marked as IPL Exhibit 221. It is the response by intervener Kathy Matara to the third set of data requests of IPL. Both counsel has it.
I don't have that yet. Thank you. I do have a 6 p.m. flight.
Provide Mr. Marcus. I hear you.
Thank you.
So did the
We're near the end. So, Mr. Bathgate, I've put before you what is a response from Ms. Matara through her attorney that provides some prior testimony that you have made. Are you familiar with what's attached as
Yes, I am.
21 pages?
Yes, I do.
And that is material you filed in the case of McKnight v. Pico C-2017-262.
Correct.
1057 in front of the Pennsylvania PUC.
Yes.
I'd like to direct your attention to page 13 of that exhibit, please.
Page 13.
13 at the top and 11 at the bottom. Yes, that's the one.
Yep.
And the bottom of the page, please.
Correct.
Could you please read the sentence that begins, "There is a safe digital meter"?
Yeah,
Slowly, please.
This is in comparison to the Aclara i210 Plus. It's the United States.
Can you please read the sentence that begins,
There is a safe digital meter alternative with the Itron C1S meter that has been widely deployed in North America. In my testing that model, there is no SMPS, but instead uses a capacitive-based power supply that does not exceed the 250 microvolt limit. There's also no radio transceivers in this Itron C1S unit. PICO should investigate this type of capacitive power supply designed to be incorporated.
You just finish that sentence. At the top.
In meters, they use or switch suppliers.
So in this case, you testified that the Itron C1S was a preferred meter as compared to what PICO was going to be using in that installation,
That is correct.
And the Itron C1S meter is the meter sitting next to you, which IPL has proposed using as the NSMA meter in this case, correct?
Yeah.
No further questions.
Mr. Schuling.
I have no questions of this
Board
witness.
Member Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Bathgate. I just have a couple. What would be an appropriate installation measure that would allow installation of the AMI meter used by IPL to be in compliance with what you have testified is a violation of the FCC grant for the communications module that's located in that meter?
Yeah, they just would need to put a small cage around it, either plastic or metal, to keep the distance.
And are you aware of any place that has required or any company that's implemented such a measure?
No, I have not seen one, but I don't see everything. So I only see a very limited window of states that do this. I don't know.
And you're not
Maybe others, I'm not aware of it.
And you're not aware of any complaints to the FCC as to the violation of these meters?
I'm not the FCC, so I wouldn't have that information.
Thank you.
Board Member Lazier.
I have no questions.
On the safety testing standards, do you believe that utility commissions or boards should require that as part of their safety testing, that standards should be in place for meters?
Yes.
What would the safety standard be in this type of situation?
First of all, from an RF perspective, right, you have to verify whether or not the professed range of transmissions is as actual what's experienced in the field, and we've seen some differences here. There has to be some way to assure that. I do know of one state which has actually imposed penalties, financial penalties, against the utilities for exceeding what they advertised as their meter performance.
What states have these types of testing standards?
In Michigan, we have some.
Do you know of any other states that have testing standards?
I'm not an expert on all the different states, what they do.
And this is to help me continue to learn, and would those testing standards be for the voltage transients that are part of the meter?
Yes, and also the RF transmissions.
With the engineer.
Right.
Are there any digital or smart meters that you believe meet these safety standards other than the one that was just identified?
Now, and the one I just identified, I've done some retesting on. Because I did some testing back in the winter of 2018. And it was at my own home, which has an analog meter as the primary feed. And I was comparing the analog meter versus the C1S meter. And I didn't see an appreciable difference between the analog meter and the digital meter at that time. And then, let me explain. My house was under construction. It's stripped to the bone. There wasn't a single appliance or anything running. And I mean, the place was empty. Okay, it was 20 below. I was freezing in the place. There's no heat. So I did the test as quickly as I could to get the data. And then when the weather warmed up, I happened to look up at the pole. I noticed I'm sharing my transformer with two other neighbors which have smart meters. Okay. Then I went back. I said, I better rerun the test. I reran the test, just the analog meter by itself, and then with an Itron C1S meter downstream from that. And I got more dirty electricity from the digital meter than the analog meter, and I documented those results. I, in fact, just performed a test in Fairfield last week on a person's home that had an analog meter in a home a couple doors down on a different transformer that had the digital C1S meter. And the home, I'll just kind of put this in general terms so it's easy to understand. You can buy a meter which you can plug in and it gives you a number, right? Anything less than 50 is considered safe. Okay, that would be within the voltage limit. Anything above that would be considered unsafe. And the more higher the number, the worse it is. So at that home, I tested with the analog meter in Fairfield. It read 45 in almost all the outlets I plugged it into. Okay. And then I went to the house down the street on a different transformer that had a C1S meter installed, and I got 145 to 148 in that range. So there's a difference between the two, and it's not insignificant. So, in my opinion, the C1S still has some problems. In the case in Pennsylvania, they're comparing to the Aclara meter, which was unbelievably bad. Let's just tell you that. Okay, it was pretty pathetic.
In your opinion, what federal or state agency should have responsibility for safety issues related to meters?
I believe utility commission should have a key role in helping to guide the technology choices to make sure that what utilities do on behalf of their shareholders is also safe for the state and the residents of the state. That's why I believe the commissions are extremely important in having a role to play in making some renderings on technology, not every rendering, but some, in order to assure the populace is safe.
I'm being told you need to turn the mic.
I apologize. Sorry.
Nope, it's not your fault. It's just where the mic is situated. Are you aware of any litigation or court cases that are related to health and safety issues on smart or digital meters?
Well, I know in California there's a tremendous amount of activity underway, and they have an analog meter outlet, opt-out program. In Michigan, we have a bill in the House to get anyone that wants an analog meter in their home to be installed without any charge for reading the meters, etc. And meter reading rates I've seen anywhere from $5 a month to nothing to $25, $40, $50 a month. It varies all over the place. Did I answer your question?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Marcus, do you have any redirect? Mr. Bathgate, if you hurry, you can make that plain.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. I'm very impressed, by the way. I've been to one other utility commission hearing, and this is much better than they have in Pennsylvania. Let me
Well, you
assure
are in Iowa, so welcome.